Welcome to JSA TV Europe, together with the Greener Data Movement for this quarter's live event focused on European digital infrastructure sustainability. I'm Jean-Marc Lim, and joining me today is Keith Breed, Senior Research Analyst at CBRE. And Keith, it's a pleasure to see you. I don't think we haven't met since before COVID, so it's been quite a few years since we've spoken a lot, but we haven't.
That's right. I mean, I think you came once to the Tech Capital thing at the CBRE, didn't you? And
yeah, last year, yes.
There. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm just a new drawer to CBRE. I've been here less than a year now, so it's been quite an interesting experience going back to a big company again from where I was before. So there you are.
Well, at least you got very nice offices to get back to.
Very nice. Yeah.
Those are probably the most modern post-COVID offices in London at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice location in the West End, so I can't complain.
Well, it's literally like 20 steps away from Bond Street Station as well, so you have your own private entrance to the station, which is useful when there's no strikes. Keith, let's talk about data centers, because that's the hot topic that everyone is talking about. Even in and outside of the industry, everyone wants to know about data centers. Let's talk through, because you have quite a wide-ranging view of what's happening on the continent. Talk us through the latest data center development, especially around investment, but with a sustainable focus to it. How important is sustainability across everything that you're looking at?
Well, it's a remarkable topic. I mean, the thing is, at the moment, there are two things happening. First of all, we're getting huge amounts of data center investment still coming into the market, even though there has been aspects of supply chain issues, inflation, all these things have been affecting the whole industry from IT and elsewhere. There's still huge investment being made in the hyperscale capacity, looking at the traditional flat markets as well, still growth going on there, particularly in the UK and in Paris and in basically around London, but going further outside London towards the southwest and towards other parts of the southeast region. And then you're also getting capacity increases into new regions. So you're talking about the likes of Lisbon, you're talking about the likes of Madrid and Milan, you're also talking about the likes of Athens and other areas where Microsoft, Google, and other hyperscale companies are putting in their cloud regions. And that's stimulating demand for data centers as well. So there's a huge amount of growth going on in these so-called tier 2, even tier 3 markets, which are starting to appear. And sustainability, you're dead right, it's a big issue. Most users now, one of the big requirements now is having renewable power at all times for all data centers. So this is a requirement coming from the occupiers, from the users, enterprises, and everybody. They want to comply with these new regulations. And sustainability and renewable power is one big aspect of that. And what's happening is the EU is now going to start introducing legislation over the next year or so. They've already got I think it's the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming in, which is going to come in beginning of next year to be applied. It's now something we've got to prepare for, because basically all the companies who use above a certain size have to report on their sustainability efforts and how much they're investing, and directors are mandated to actually make a statement in their annual report, which is going to be quite a big change, and that's not something which has happened before. So again, there's going to be much more focus on it because it's being put up at a very senior management level.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because when we say quite a few companies, it's actually any company that deals in the data center space will have to abide by that new regulation, because I think it's companies from 150,000 euros revenue.
So virtually everybody will have to comply. And it's going to cause a lot of problems for some companies, particularly those who have their own inbuilt, enterprise service or whatever, because that's going to be an issue for them. Because they may have to think very carefully now about what source and go to a more specialist provider. So for some data centers, it could be a big opportunity. You're going to find that, I think, the in-house data center will probably become more and more obsolete, and they'll have to go into a third-party managed colo with experience and expertise on how to provide green, sustainable services. So more and more.
I think that kind of echoes what we heard at a recent industry event, where people were saying, actually, these regulations can drive a lot of business. Yes, they can be a pain for some, but they can also drive a lot of business into data center operators. So is that what you're seeing in Europe? And that's what you, especially within tier 2 markets, are you seeing these regulations already pushing some development into the ground?
I'm not sure yet. It's not quite happening. I mean, what we're seeing is, I think we're seeing enterprises actually asking questions now of their suppliers and saying, how green are you? What kind of renewable energy do you have? Are you looking at these different types of emissions, like the scope 1, which is basically your direct emissions, what you actually provide yourselves, and there's scope 2, which is what is in your supply chain. And that's something which they're asking for of their co-location providers and data center vendors, which they're using. And that's part of their exercise now. So we're seeing this in a lot of large companies, and it's going to start filtering down, I think, to the SME, the small, medium-sized sector as well, because they will probably have to start reporting as well at some stage. And, Europe and the UK has got a similar ambition, I think, to actually go to be a carbon neutral society by 2050. The route map for that is a bit unclear, but probably it all mean we'll have to do the same thing.
Right now.
Yeah. So, it's going to be a huge amount of change and some regulatory burden that we have to accept. And I think the larger data center companies, the people like Equinix, Digital Realty, and others who had this kind of experience already, will be well positioned to actually take on more capacity, I think, and more enterprise users as a result. And I think it's going to be in the end, quite healthy for the industry, because everyone will have to just try and adapt. And you've seen cloud service providers do this over a long period of time now. Microsoft, I think about 2 years ago, they introduced a online monitoring tool talking about carbon efficiency in their cloud. And this is something which has started to happen with the cloud service providers, and now the data center providers and others who are going to have to follow suit as well. A lot of this technology is not necessarily proprietary. You can talk to people like, there are all kinds of data governance type companies like Archer, which used to be part of RSA, who provide this kind of service as an online tool. And so enterprises will have to start adopting this as part of their ESG reporting, I think, to actually just see how clean they are and what kind of impact they're having on the environment. So it's going to be quite a big change, I think.
And I think hopefully a change for the better.
Yes.
The greater good. I was going to say, because you mentioned like the big guys like Equinix and Digital Realty, they will potentially gobble up quite a lot of the enterprise demand out of these new regulations coming into the market. So what will be the play of the smaller players, of the boutique data centers, of the ones that have 1-2 facilities? Do they have a space? Are they going to struggle?
I think it's interesting because it's starting to see a bit of consolidation going on in the market. So what has happened over the last few years, you've had an enormous amount of funds coming into the market, private equity, new investment funds coming in, and they've actually financed a lot of new build data centers. So you're talking about Vantage, you're talking about Digital Bridge with Vantage and so on, and you're talking about a lot of other companies. And some of these companies now are looking to actually consolidate more and will become bigger, I think. So you'll probably see more companies coming into the market and merging and acquiring others. That's been a factor in the UK and in Europe. I think it's going to continue happening. So you'll probably have a bit of a shakeout. But I think at the same time, the smaller data centers will be faced with a choice whether to merge with other companies or whether to actually become more of a specialist in, say, a hosting environment or a managed service type provider, rather than actually try and offer pure colo services. There's also talk about the edge and whether that's going to grow or not, and that's always been going on for a long time now. It's always difficult to see where the actual commercial imperative is. We understand that there would be a need for, with IoT and things, for local computing type services, but so far it seems to be provided for by the traditional colo providers. You don't seem to have a huge kind of requirement for the small, diversified data center just yet.
Interesting. I think as you were talking, and especially talking about partnerships, it kind of reminded me of what happens in the post-Brexit years, where you had the UK companies and European companies partnering up, like Volta Data Centers, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's now part of Verne Global, which partnered up with Lux Connect. And they were operating, it was almost like a single company, but with 2 brands, just a very streamlined partnership. So maybe that was a warm-up for what's coming in the next.
Yeah, I think so. I think as well, there's still a lot of talk. There is some companies trying to sell themselves, I think, on the market at the moment. I'm probably familiar with some of them, and that's going to happen, I think. And so there will be more industry groupings being formed, I think, in the data center business. I think on the whole, it's because the hyperscale is such a big investment required. And so you need to have scale and you need to have finance to actually allow yourself to actually compete in that kind of market.
Yeah.
But also the other thing which is happening is you're getting with tier 2, tier 3 markets coming along. And then you're going to see some interesting changes. I think if Central Europe takes off, for example, we're talking about connectivity around the Mediterranean, for example, the likes of Greece, the likes of Barcelona, the likes of different parts of the Med where you're going to see content providers coming in, then it could be a very interesting market. You're going to see some more specialist providers, I think, moving into those areas and offering a kind of content hub with connectivity to a cable landing station, which is going to be attractive to some users. So
it is really interesting, especially,
Sorry, that's starting to happen. So in the Mediterranean, you're getting connectivity down to the Middle East and to Asia and to Africa. And that's quite an interesting market for a data center provider. So you don't necessarily need to have a big scale or a big hyperscale provider. What you need to have is the connectivity and the connection to a landing station. And that gives you some kind of advantage, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting what you're saying, because that is literally what's happening on the ground. I mean, if you look at Start Campus in Portugal, for instance, it's big player, big money, big campus, getting in all the cables in, including a new one called Olisipu with Elalink, trying to create that bridge between the Atlantic and Central Europe. And the whole concept revolves around energy. And I think that's the new business model for data centers, the energy side of things, where it's no longer, let's build something to host data, let's build something which is green first, and then let's look at the data and the servers. Not necessarily like that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I think green energy is very interesting. But the funny thing is the European market seems to be making a reasonably good attempt to try and transition to a green energy for the first time. I mean, I looked at the National Grid ESO. They have a kind of real-time chart which talks about the power they're generating. And about 40 to 50% of it now is renewable power. So that is generally offshore wind from the northwest and northeast and from Scotland, which is being generated throughout the UK and we sent. So that's slowly happening in Europe as well. It's happening in Italy, it's happening in Spain, it's happening in other countries. So it's quite a big step forward, I think. So,
yeah. I mean, it's without wanting to go into it, but it's one of the side effects, probably the only positive side effects of this war in Ukraine has been the push for different sources of energy. And a big push towards renewables. So maybe this speeded up a little bit the process by governments across the continent. So it's probably the only good thing that came out of it. But it will probably have been better just to be a bit delayed as opposed to having what we have. And then Keith, so if we quickly look into what CBRE is doing and it's going to be doing over the next few months, can you lift the veil a little bit on what's going to come from you?
Try. I mean, we're doing a webinar every quarter. So there'll be one coming up very soon, which I'll try and send you details on, which is talking about the flat market, or the flat D market. So that is Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. So that, we talk about the trends which are taking place there and the growth in those markets, which are still about 70% of the market around Europe and the EMEA region. But we're also looking at doing research into Africa, and that's going to be something which is coming out later on this year. And we're also looking at the Middle East as well, because the Middle East is another kind of region where there's a huge amount of growth going on. And we heard about what's happening, obviously, in Saudi Arabia and all this kind of huge new investment in capacity for data centers and for IT as a whole, for driving the whole new economy. And it's happening in the UAE, and it's going to be happening in a lot of other countries around the Gulf states as well. So that's something which we're going to be looking at. And we're also trying to expand our coverage into, the kind of emerging markets. And we're talking about Milan to some extent. We're talking about Madrid, which are two big kind of growth areas we see in Europe at the moment. But also looking at the likes of the Nordics, and we're looking at Central and Eastern Europe as well, and connecting down into the Mediterranean area. So we're going to be extremely busy, getting quite a bit of client work, getting quite a bit of transaction work. It's interesting in a way being in CBRE, because you get a crossover point between the users, the end users, some of whom we manage, and also the actual hyperscale providers as well, who are coming to us looking for land and all kinds of areas where they can build on. So we get the kind of both ends of the spectrum. There's the small enterprise user and the really large hyperscale company as well. So it's really fascinating.
Well, you're going to be very, very busy, I can tell.
Always busy.
if people want to reach out, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, come to the CBRE.com website and look for data center services, DCS, or data center solutions, and that will be give you access to resource we have online, and also have a look at our LinkedIn page as well, because we're always going to have details data center solutions on new services that we're bringing out, new reports, and also details on our forthcoming webinars as well.
Well, Keith, as always, it's a pleasure speaking to you. I could stay here for hours just talking through everything, because if we go into each market, then we have conversation for days.
Absolutely, of course. So, yeah,
a pleasure as always. Thanks so much. And thank you for joining us today and watching JSA TV Live. Don't forget to check our social channels for more content. Until next time, happy networking.